Welcome to this flight of the Retail Pilot. I'm your host, Ken Pilot, former CEO and current brand advisor, retail tech investor, and board member. I'm thrilled to share with you the insights from some of retail's legends and leaders, as well as my perspective on retail today. This podcast is sponsored by the following. January Digital is a marketing leadership company solving business challenges through consulting, media excellence, and actionable analytics for some of the most innovative, growth-oriented brands in the country, including Carhartt, Kendra Scott, Strivectin, and Steve Madden. Made up of January Consulting and January Digital, they offer strategic leadership services and full-funnel media planning, execution, and optimization, leveraging data to provide insights, yielding client success. Bluecore's software solution turns anonymous online shoppers into known customers and repeat customers. Bluecore enables retailers to personalize and optimize their email, SMS, and site marketing campaigns by delivering targeted and relevant messages based on where every customer is in their journey. Bluecore replaces annoying high-volume messaging with high-value messaging. Customers include Alo Yoga, Neiman Marcus, and Gap. Welcome to the Retail Pilot Leaders and Legends. Today, I have Amy Williams, the CEO at Citizens of Humanity Group, headquartered in Los Angeles, California. Amy joined Citizens of Humanity as the company's president in 2009 and ultimately assumed the CEO position in 2015, overseeing the business for the company's family of brands, including Citizens of Humanity and AGOLDE. Williams' previous experience includes executive VP roles at Lucky Brand Jeans, Senior Vice President of Product Development and Design for Gap, Inc. Williams serves on the board at Girls, Inc., Greater Los Angeles, and empowerHER. She is an advisor to Every Mother Counts and Bay Area Women's Sports Initiative. My guest today on the Retail Pilot is Amy Williams. And to say that we go back over time would be the understatement of my podcast career. Amy, welcome to the Retail Pilot.
Thank you for having me. I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, wow, we're going to go way back.
We could go way back. Tell us a bit about your journey to retail. What inspired you to pursue this line of work, which needs inspiration, as you and I both know?
Well, actually, I needed a lot of inspiration. What inspired me actually was two things. My parents, who were quite frugal, dressed me in Sears Toughskins. And I realized in high school that that was not a great look. And to be frank, I used to sneak in a pair of Levi's hand-me-downs from my cousin. So early on, like as we all get our first jobs, one of the things that I recognized was that at the end of a weekend at a bakery, a local bakery, I was driving to Bloomingdale's to buy new clothes. And a job at Bloomingdale's would give me a discount, which would allow me to buy more clothing. So I credit them and fault them at the same time in equal measure as we do with our parents. And then as time progressed, I had the good fortune of meeting you very early in my career, and that set me on a very different trajectory.
That was at Macy's.
That was at Macy's.
And you had the good misfortune of working for me at Macy's.
It was actually quite fortunate. When I was in college, I was planning to go to law school. And I recognized that I was naturally gravitating to my sales job at Talbot's, of all places, in Buffalo, which was, I think, one of the best places you could work up there. And I was really inspired, actually. Sally Frame, who was like a very dynamic female CEO, came for a store visit and, kind of like a bit of fire and came into the store, and in equal measure was both strategic and creative. And I thought, wow, this feels like something that I'm just spending more and more time thinking about and wanting to do. So fast forward, I applied for an internship at Macy's. I looked at all the programs, and Macy's was really like the most, I think, highly regarded at the time. And so I went through the application process and was selected as one of the interns. And that was when we first met. I think it was in 1988. Yeah, 88.
Ways back for sure.
Yeah.
So you learned a few things at Macy's, and I left Macy's. And then I believe you decided to also fall into the Gap and join the Gap organization. What year was that roughly?
That was 89. Yeah, it was 1989. I think you made an introduction. The company was growing by leaps and bounds. It was at a time that they were still buying Levi's, actually. So it was sort of pre some of the Gap branded product, at least in the denim category. And you made an introduction. I interviewed with the HR team. They politely turned me down. 6 months later, they were still looking for people in the assistant sort of trainee sector. And you said, like, just, you know what, meet her again. And I think you probably recommended some other people. And so the second time around, when I started to meet with some of the executives in the merchandising team, I was offered a position and I moved to San Francisco 4 days before the big earthquake in October.
Great timing. I'm sure that made you really love being in the Bay Area.
Exactly.
And you started in which area at Gap?
So I was assigned to the women's bottoms department. I think in this day and age, no one would call an actual merchandising department women's bottoms. But we had both denim and, as I mentioned at the time, the company was buying Levi's for women's, and then all the like twill, lycra pants, anything that was in that classification. So I was just assigned to that department, and that began a bit of a love affair with denim.
You transitioned from really being on the merchant side to the design side. Talk a little bit more about that change, because not only did it take you from, I think, San Francisco, but it moved you back to New York.
Yeah, that's right. So I was living in San Francisco in 1989. The company was doing incredibly well. There was a lot of great energy and really incredible talent when I think back to those days and where people are now. It was really an amazing experience to be a part of. But I miss New York. I mean, the culture at the Gap was fast paced and we worked long hours and there was a fair amount of travel, lots of innovation. But the city of San Francisco, for me, as someone who did want to be in the fashion industry, like did not line up to that. So we would, finish work at 10:30 at night and nothing would be open. And so I actually interviewed at J. Crew when Emily Woods was still there and accepted a position to move back to New York and work as part of the J. Crew team in those early days. And the company very thoughtfully said, you can move to New York and still work for the Gap and handle merchandising and go to the factories and work with production partners. And so I did. I was situated in the design office, and it was at a time that was far less collaborative. So the instruction was, don't go, my office, I think, was actually near the bathroom, which was convenient because I was told not to go anywhere near the design area. And the design team was designing a lot of products, not denim per se, and they were presenting a lot of products, but none of the products were made either with the fabrics that the merchants would actually have to, utilize. They weren't made with cost in mind. It really was like a creative design exercise, not to take anything away from that group. So living between the two worlds, I think actually gave me a lot of insight into what both needed, right? Merchandising needed a point of view, and the design team needed a business person to actually understand what might sell and be commercially viable, but was forward thinking and not looking in the rearview mirror. And they also needed some guidance as to like who and where to make it. And so it was a very natural evolution. At the end of that year, I remember being asked like, oh, you're ready to move back to San Francisco? The answer was unfortunately still no. And I was invited then to join the design team and starting to help create actual denim product for the women's division.
I recall you played such an important role bridging merchandising and design. It was like we put the right person in the job to bring business intelligence to the design team, and a critical job for any company growing a brand as quickly as we were growing a brand, because it's not all art, and we know it ain't all science.
Yeah.
If you don't have somebody in between, you can really lose your way radically one side or the other.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. I think that is the beautiful tension, and that's what's always kept me interested in this field, right? Like, how can you be a really good listener, and how can you think about what a consumer might want and present it to them with clarity and conviction, but also be cognizant of where they've been and what they might be expecting all the time, and trying to hold both in equal measure, and also trying to bridge gaps of teams, right? I think the best leaders and the best executives in retail and probably other fields are actually equally strong-minded and good collaborators, and that helps them get the best out of the teams around them.
Putting you on the spot as you speak about leadership, you worked for a number of people while at Gap and also worked with a number of people at Gap. Who are some of the people that you recall that really helped shape your career? Do not say me.
No,
that were inspiring, that were influential, kind of that provided lessons learned that you've taken forward to today.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's so funny because I think so much I do, and it's not because we're doing this conversation or having this conversation together. You really were instrumental in like putting me on a path that I never imagined for myself. I probably would be running a, luxury department store, right? Because I was very focused on store line. But to answer your question, I think people like Tracy Gardner, who also had this sort of quiet, it was never about her. It was always about like the work and the team. So she was certainly someone in my later years. Janet Hayes, I think, was a peer and like an incredibly smart, dynamic leader who always wanted to push things further and was, I think, and is a very savvy business person. So those two people stand out for me. Leanne Niels was a really creative, like she was on the other side of the spectrum, but I think was the first person to actually like appreciate and understand commercial luxury or like accessible luxury and reimagined Banana Republic in the early days. Really fun personality and a steward of other creative talents. So those are some of the folks. And then I look at people now like Dave Powers and like what he's done. I know you had him on the podcast. Like, he maybe wasn't the person getting the most attention in the Gap days, but gosh, how smart and how insightful. And then Gene Jackson was like this dynamo, really intimidating for someone like me with my personality, but also, I was probably 22 or 23 when I was in a room that she was in, and she was just a force.
When did you make the move to leave Gap and join Lucky Brand, and what inspired you to make that move?
Yeah, so it was early 2003. I think Mickey had left the company maybe 6 months prior, and there was new executive leadership. So Paul Presser came in as the CEO. Gary Muto moved over from Banana Republic to Gap. And to be frank, I sensed, and then I was right, that there was conversation about bringing someone in. So let me just back up. My job at that time was head of design, product development, and pre-production for Gap brand and Gap body. And we had been working on a major turnaround and we were starting to see success. So I was in that design job for about a year and had a very strong point of view around what the Gap meant in terms of like the world of American sportswear. And both of those folks came into the company, or in Gary's case, moved into the Gap division. And their belief was that the Gap needed to be more of like a fast fashion brand, and that we needed to have a design lead who truly came from the design industry. And they were in the process of interviewing someone. And again, like I sort of sensed this was going on. And there was conversation about my moving to San Francisco and running one of the business units. And I just took a step back and I thought, you know what? Like I completely disagree with that strategy. Like that is not what the Gap needs to be in the universe of retail and products. And as the conversations became more direct, I just said, San Francisco, I don't want to be on the receiving end of that product strategy. And San Francisco isn't the place for me. It's time for me to move on. And I think there was a sense of shock. I'd been there for 14 years and there was a request to train the person who was going to follow me. And it was really hard. I remember feeling really emotional and sad about leaving the job and feeling obviously pushed in. But knowing in my heart it was time to go do something else. And within like 48 hours of those more honest conversations, someone walked into my office and said, Lucky Brand's looking for a head of retail. Do you know anyone? And for 14 years or 13 years, I'd been told, like, you should manage a P&L. You should come to San Francisco. You should do this. And I thought, you know what? I could do that. And so I met Angela Ahrens, who was the group president for Liz Claiborne at the time, next day, I think it was. And I walked out and I thought, you know what? That's who I want to work for. I want to work for someone as smart and as dynamic as she is. I then went and met the two original founders at Lucky. And, one of them, I think, had a good insight for the brand, and the others, maybe not someone I would spend a lot of personal time with, but I knew that I could take the brand and really turn it into something that was profitable and well run. And so I ran the retail division at first. There were about 80 stores. And when I left, we had 120 something. And then I assumed responsibility for wholesale and e-com. So it was like my first opportunity to run a complete business and P&L.
How long were you at Lucky?
3 years.
So Amy, following your time at Lucky, you transitioned to a few other opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Share with us a bit more about that.
Yeah. No, so what ended up happening was when I was at Lucky, I got separated from my first husband and met my now husband. So he was living in the Bay Area and had children from his first marriage, and they were young at the time. He and his wife had gone through a separation. And so we knew we wanted to be in the Bay Area. And so that was the reason I left Lucky. I thought about going back into a corporate role. I was actually interviewing at Levi's and talking with Robert Hansen, talking to the Gap again. And I just thought, Lucky was kind of the beautiful balance of being very entrepreneurial and also having the corporate structure of a bigger organization. And the idea of like going back into something like a Levi's or a Gap, while the iconic nature of Levi's was interesting, that wasn't where my life stage, being a stepmother for the first time, that really wasn't how I saw our life, our life sort of taking shape. And so I consulted for the Gap for about 6 months. And then we started a company with partners that was focused on the kids space. So for a brief time, it was a couple of years, started Peak. And then we can touch on that, but that was right before, I think, 2008. So not the best time economically, but also respectfully, we made mistakes with the brand and with the business. And I wasn't running from the mistakes, but I was certainly walking away from a culture that was created with our partners. And I was getting some calls from the outside. One of them was from the Citizens of Humanity founder. And I thought, you know what? Like, this feels like the right thing to do. So that's how I got to Citizens.
You're alerted to an opportunity now at Citizens of Humanity. What were they looking for at the time?
At the time, they had been looking for a president or a CEO, and they were actively recruiting. And as Gary, one of the founders, would say, he was like, this name kept coming up on all the lists, and it was my name, apparently. And so he called, and I said, I'm not looking to move to LA or take on a full-time role. Scott and I had just had our twin daughters, who are now almost 15. And so it's not the right thing for me. And he's a pretty persistent person. He's a lawyer by background. And a couple weeks later was like, are you sure? Like, let's talk. Let's just spend some time together. And so we did. We met, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for him. He's, there's a handful of people that I would say are like the smartest and personal integrity and all of those things. And he would be on that list. And so he basically said, look, we do need a president. We do need someone down here all the time, but we would just love you to work with us. And I knew of Jerome, right? When I was at the Gap, Jerome DeHaan had created and brought 7 for All Mankind to the market. And you might remember the days where like all of a sudden everyone on the buying team and the design team was wearing 7 jeans. And after 7, he created Citizens of Humanity. But I could see, to be frank, that the product wasn't as relevant and as exciting as it had been when the brand was first launched. And I also felt like while the product was interesting, it wasn't a brand. And that was something that I could change. And so I said, absolutely, there's this open schedule. I can work sort of from home, and whatever sort of hours, as Gary said, worked for me. And at the age of 41, to be a mother of twins, that was important to me. And so that was how my journey started. At the same time, they found a CEO who came from Europe, who had a great resume and what looked to be really good experience on paper. But when he joined the company about 6 months later, after a year, both Gary and Jerome and the private equity group could see that he wasn't the right fit for our organization. And so when he left a year later, they asked me to step into that role.
You take on the CEO job, which is now really the first company that you've run. Were you CEO at Lucky Brand or president at Lucky Brand?
My title at Lucky Brand was executive vice president, but I operated as the president. The two founders held the president title, like they were co-presidents, but from an operating perspective and day to day, yeah.
And then what was your charge? What were they asking you to do when you joined Citizens of Humanity? What was the number one near-term objective that needed to be addressed?
I think really a distribution strategy, for lack of a better word. The company had always been more focused on specialty stores and controlled distribution, but wanted to solidify a stronger specialty, and let's call it at the time other, because e-com was just sort of coming into play in a meaningful way. So I would say that. I think the other thing really was to, again, work side by side with a founder, right? So at Lucky Brand, I had successfully worked with founder and then executives from Liz Claiborne. Here was a similar charge, work with Jerome as a founder creative, but also with private equity ownership and Gary as a business person, navigate both of those things in equal measure.
And did Citizens have any stores, or was really relying solely on wholesale distribution?
Completely focused on wholesale. So we didn't even have an e-com site. It was the Citizens brand solely. Gold Sign had been brought over with Adriano. When Adriano joined the Citizens team, which predates me, he had brought the Gold Sign brand name with him. So yeah, completely wholesale distribution. And actually at the time, the European business was mostly managed by distributors, which is no longer the case and something that we also work to change in those early years.
Take us on the journey at Citizens, starting with being a wholesale first and really only company to where you are today. And do share, to the degree you're comfortable, some sense of size of the total business and also of your D2C versus wholesale.
So we, at the time, we were, as mentioned, really like a Citizens brand. So Citizens Women's, Citizens Men, wholesale focused, and really solely a wholesale business. Our international business, I think it's a little misleading because distributors tend to buy to a distribution agreement, which is a danger of a distributor model, in my opinion. So the percent of business we were doing internationally was probably close to like 10% of our total. I will say we'll be close to like 200 million in sales revenue. And we've more than, even in the last 6 or 7 years, our profitability is fourfold what it was. And the size of our business is more than double. Hopefully that gives you some perspective. Our e-com business runs about 15% of our total. One of the tenets of our company is like, we are literally never on sale. We do not buy customers. So we're very focused on thinking about sustainability from the standpoint of we want our brands to be around forever. And I think, the European brands do this well. I started watching, I've forgotten the name of it, the show on Apple about Chanel and Christian Dior, right? And I think a lot of European brands interest me because they think about generational development, right? So Bruno Cucinelli is a great example, or Laura Piani. Like they're not there for a financial outcome and to build a company and sell it. And I think a lot of the contemporary brands, to be frank, fall into that model. And so when I think about, where we are and how we think top line and bottom line in tandem. We think about quality of product and investing in quality of design and quality make. And then we think about really high quality distribution partners, organizations that are led by great merchants and have a point of view and don't offer their customer too much choice. And all of those tenets have served us well over the last 14 years, and I think we'll continue to.
That said, how do you take this company from 200 million in sales to $500 million? What's next, Citizens?
Yeah, I think that's, without sounding arrogant, I think that's actually fairly easy to do. We have two brands now, right? We have Citizens of Humanity and we have AGOLDE Women's, both of which have probably the fastest sell-throughs at retail of any of our competitors and continued demand for our products beyond denim, which is how we entered the market within both of them. So what we see is within our existing retail partnerships, how do we go deeper in the relationships? How do we show up better at retail? I spent the afternoon yesterday with the GM of Neiman Marcus in Beverly Hills. We had a lovely lunch. We walked the entire store. We talked about a lot of other departments and interesting departments. And as I said, you walk then over to the contemporary department and it's filled with brands that are struggling, right? Like the Guess acquisition of Rag & Bone, I think it's sad to see, but it's not surprising. Or I might look over to Vince and I can see what's happening there. So contemporary was a, concept, for lack of a better word, or a category that was developed probably 25 years ago. And I don't think those in the contemporary market have the same introspective thought and the same, I think, disciplines that luxury brands have, or beauty brands have, or footwear brands have. And to me, that's what I see as an opportunity. I think there's a lot of market share to have. We are an affordable luxury offer, whether it's Citizens or AGOLDE. We've expanded product categories. And so what I'd like to see is when you go into the locations that we're in, you see a strong branded presentation where the products really are both scarce and desirable in equal measure, and that we continue to fuel that with our wholesale partners. Our e-com business is incredibly strong, and I think there's ways we can make that shopping experience easier and smarter. And then we'll look at a handful of locations for retail that are experiential. We have one store in Aspen, really high average value sales. Not surprising because it's Aspen, but people do come in and they want everything from us, from Jessica McCormick jewelry to our jeans to Blase Milano blazers. And it's cultivated in a way that feels very believable and authentic because those are relationships we've had for a long time. And so we'll open an AGOLDE store later this year, and then we'll see what feels right for us, beyond that. But that's how we think about the different distribution channels. There's a lot more opportunity internationally. Again, even in the markets that we're in, expanding them thoughtfully and going deeper with the folks that we're working with. If you walk to, I could go on, but like if you walked into Bloomingdale's 59th Street right now, we look terrible, right? But we're unveiling two shops, one for AGOLDE and one for Citizens, that will be the first anywhere in the world. So you're like, oh my God, how is it that you don't have that yet, right? There's still so much potential.
Retail strategy within wholesale, is that mostly being expressed through shop-in-shops? Is that where you want to go? So you're being well-defined within a department store, a clear area or clear delineation around the brand, whether it's AGOLDE or it's Citizens. It will be a shop-in-shop?
It will be. What we'll do is we'll do tiers of things. To your point, we'll do shop and shop. So like at Selfridges, there's a clear, strong branded presentation. We'll do that at Bloomingdale's. But someone like Holt Renfrew, who we have a great relationship with, we won't do a shop and shop per se, but we'll do a very strong, like permanent installation, let's call it, of the complete brand, from outerwear to denim jeans to woven shirting and knits, etc. So yeah.
Your store in Aspen, which I have been through and loved, it's really a lifestyle store. It's sort of like, yes, it's a Citizen store, but it could have been called Amy's Favorites just as easily because of the way you pull in, whether it's artisanal bowls or other third-party product, as we'd like to call them, but just the way you put that together feels like a lifestyle that you express, that you behold. Why wouldn't you do more of those? Is it too time consuming, not cost effective? What's the opportunity there? Because it would seem like a great way to resonate for the brand.
I think it is. I think that we are just a very disciplined company, right? So we own our own manufacturing. That's not for the faint at heart. It's a full-time job. Thank goodness we have such a strong COO. And now Kelly Gavildis just joined us to head up product development
Saw
and
that.
sourcing for all of the categories that we're doing. So like, if you said to me, what do I think the company looks like in 5 years or 8 years? I definitely see more of those in like the perfect right locations. What we're allergic to is like the Lucky Brand model where it's like, we've got to open this many stores to show some sort of growth. And you're just like throwing stuff. I was going to say something else up against the wall, but I think you're absolutely right. And then imagine that same thing for AGOLDE where you could walk in and you're like, oh my God, like I so get it. And some of the relationships and partnerships we have can come to life there in ways that are really interesting and engaging. And they also become locations like over the summer, we had, a beautiful day or two with Martha Saffer, who runs this amazing spa in Santa Monica, Surya. And we're like, we just invited people who had supported the store and that were fans of the brand to come and spend the day with us. And it's like, those are the kinds of things I think that build connection and they create a sense of community. And to me, that's what retail should feel like these days. And it's more interesting for us to work on. So yeah, I think it's just about getting one or two locations perfect. And we feel like we've done a good job of that with Citizens. And now doing that with AGOLDE, roll out the shop and shop or our wholesale presentations in a way that we would be more proud of. And then let's see where things take us.
Makes sense. Layering on select retail stores that show lifestyle and brand extensions, if you will. Are you doing drop ship online today with some of these third-party partners that you brought into your store, or is it solely Citizens or AGOLDE product?
So everything that we have out in the world for our wholesale partners, they buy. It's owned by them, right? Because inventory management is a very big part of the way we think and operate. And then for any of the third party products that are in our store, we have a special relationship with Jessica McCormick because it's high end jewelry and some of the items are $50,000. But everything else is something that we've invested in because we believe in it and it sells at a rate that is quite good.
That's great. There are a lot of vendors, manufacturers out there today that can get product on a site, but they have to own the inventory. And it's very challenging to survive that way. Certainly retailers, large retailers, whether it's a Nordstrom's, a Macy's, or Bloomingdale's, and they can just tell a brand, listen, we're going to carry your product, but online only. And oh, by the way, you own all the inventory. Make sure it's in stock when we need it. And of course, we get the same margin as if we were buying it from you and stocking it in our warehouse. So a whole set of other challenges. The other thing that you've done that's very interesting is you've built a sustainable company, very focused on the way product is sourced, responsible sourcing. Talk to us a little bit more about that, because I think that's become one of the really strong tenets of your brand and what you stand for and are very proud of.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the company, when Jerome started it, his focus was about product quality first, right? He grew up designing at Guess and then Lucky Brand, and his whole idea of premium and more expensive luxury denim was meant to stay exactly that. In the early days, that meant us making our product in Los Angeles. Then it moved to us owning our own factory in Los Angeles, so we really could control every aspect of that. And then when we built the AGOLDE brand and continued to grow, we needed sourcing that was also high quality, but a bit more affordable. And that's when our Turkey operation was born. Throughout the process, we've always thought about and invested in, I would say primarily at the laundry, practices that were more thoughtful. So water recycling, laser technology, changing and moving away from stone washing and all of the things that none of us should be doing. But then as we looked at our raw material sourcing, we shifted towards organic, and some portion of our products have recycled cotton in them as well. And it was probably about 3 years ago, actually, one of our main suppliers said to us, I really want you to watch this film and regenerative agriculture, which I learned recently that regenerative was the most searched word on the New York Times last year. Like, that's how much is happening in the regenerative space, both in the food industry, apparel, and other places. And so when she directed us to that idea and told us to watch the film Kiss the Ground, for me personally, it was like a bit of an aha moment because I've never, like in all of our years, I've never asked someone where the cotton is from. Maybe back in the day it was like, oh, is it, Pima? Is it upland cotton? I don't even know if I knew that word if I really think about it. Anyway, so it started us on this path of like, wow, like we could make choices that are different. And if we don't lead, who will, right? In our premium space, it's the right thing to do. So it's been a multi-year project. The product has really started to come into the market in our brands in January and February of this month. And we have made the commitment that we're going to use regenerative cotton as our single cotton source, along with recycled cotton for the future. And then as we look at other categories, we've incorporated that in knitwear, woven shirts, twill bottoms, and now we'll circle back to some of our newer categories like sweaters and say, how can we take a regenerative mindset? And then we have one major project on the horizon, which I'll come back and talk about in a couple months, that's also in this arena that is very much, it would be a big and major change within the denim industry that we're excited about. So I think, again, right, like I'm 55, been doing this for 30 something years. I think you take pause and say, like, what do I really want to be doing and what impact can I make beyond like going to a cocktail party saying, oh, I like AGOLDE and I like Citizens. And so I think it's a responsibility that a lot of us are starting to feel like we need to take on and help make some change and inroads in the industry.
I so admire how you've built this brand, not only with great product, but just pricing integrity,
Thank you.
branding integrity, and then now being as thoughtful as you are around the sourcing of the product. I don't know of many other brands out there that I can point to that operate that, and also having this measured growth approach specifically to the direct-to-consumer side of the business. As you said, typically you would find brands, we're going to open 10 stores this year, 20 stores next year, 50 stores the year after. So here's the next, not challenge, but really more of a question. How do you look at marketing when so much of your sales are being driven by brand partners versus you driving this as a direct-to-consumer business first? What does marketing mean to Citizens in AGOLDE?
Yeah. So, it's funny because we don't do traditional marketing and we don't do paid, like I know I have friends obviously at other brands, and whether they're multidimensional like stores and e-com or some direct to consumer, we haven't done the like, oh, we're going to buy customers and our average acquisition cost is $40 and blah, blah, blah. What we do, and I think what is important is, I think the more we can keep our brands relevant, and it starts for me with great product and how we show up at wherever the consumer chooses to shop, department stores, our own stores in the future, or e-com, the more we can show up well and thoughtfully there with the right products, the more the demand is created. I think there's a scarcity model too. You can look at Hermes as an example, right? Like if you can always get something, do you really want it over time? So there's a tension, and fortunately, we can only produce so much in our factories. So while we continue to increase our production capacity, we're mindful of letting ourselves sell out of certain things that are more seasonal products while we keep the base of what's going like on replenishment. More than 50% of the sales that we do in a month come in during that month. So that's how fast we look to turn our product at retail. So we don't look for the biggest upfront orders with our retail partners. We say, let's get you set up, see what's going to sell, but get you back into the right sizes, and we stock it accordingly. So all that to say, back to the marketing question, we believe that continuing to do more revolutionary things and making sure our products are on tastemakers and a broad range of them, not necessarily just influencers that pay to play, because we don't do that, but wanting people to organically fall in love with our brands is how we believe we can build over time events and hosting them with retail partners. Retail partners that we have do a lot of business with their EIP luxury customers. How do we romance or make friends with those folks? Like those are the kinds of events and programs that we do. So we do a lot of marketing, and we spend, and the creative director for the company is really innovative and interesting. And I think that's the kind of stuff that's important to us at this point in time. Our econ business, we do very, very little in terms of like paid advertising. I can tell you it's increased 40% over last year and 40% over the year, the year prior to that. So the more people see us in the market and the more their friends talk about like, oh, I love Citizens, or wow, Citizens is looking really good these days, which is what we've heard a lot in the last like 2 or 3 years, the more they just naturally go to our site and they see, frankly, a range of products they don't see even at our biggest e-tailer, right? We've got 200 plus things on the site from every classification. And they're like, wow, I had no idea. I came here for the horseshoe jean because I saw it in the Wall Street Journal style section. And like, this is looking really good. So that's how we think about it. It's pretty multi-dimensional. We have different programs that we run and there's different partnerships. And yesterday, anecdotally in the morning, I had breakfast with Dee from We Sweet and like 6 other women. And all of them were like, oh my God, I love AGOLDE. And like those women tell other women. And now, frankly, in both divisions, we have men's product. They tell other men. Or Harry Styles was wearing at Trader Joe's yesterday, the Aspen Haas Brothers hoodie that we do. And it's like people will send it to me and they know it's ours. And so that to me feels really authentic also. And I think can stand the test of time.
Feels very organic for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thinking about technology, because it's so much of what we hear today and, pretty close to my heart. How is technology helping you move the business forward? How is it helping you grow? What are you excited about with all this talk of AI?
Mm-hmm. So I think that is an area that we need to do and think about more. I think we have to be a lot more thoughtful about it because we're a smaller team. And you could say every year, really every 6 months, we have these like major projects that we need to work on. It's the thing that continues to get sort of pushed to the side when we're honest with ourselves. What I think, particularly based on the growth that we've seen and the complexity that we now have in terms of like our SKU offer, what I see is like one of the most important things we can look at is inventory management and inventory integrity. So like we're working on complete like warehouse update. When we do that, do we need to advance actually how we're tracking and tracing our products and making sure that the inventory, like, I was looking earlier today, even in preparation for our call, like at your site, I'm like, oh my God, the idea of actually knowing the accuracy of our inventory, not just at one store, but like in our warehouse at a level that's higher, allows our warehouse to be more efficient. We have our own warehouse, so we pick and pack every order. We ship it out. We try and get it out within 48 hours, but we don't. And a lot of the lost time is spent, oh my God, here's this Net-a-Porter order, but we're missing this one style because it's not where it was supposed to be. Like there's some like low hanging fruit. So I would say that I think we also need to get more curious about AI and like, how could we use it in a company that is, again, not deep in terms of like the numbers of people on the team, but what would make sense for us. But for the short term, I see things like inventory management and data around size selling and out of stocks, particularly because our ecom business is significantly growing and our wholesale business is more complex. Right now, the way we work is we have senior team members who are leading the sales organization who decide each week the styles they want to cut, but we don't have enough data to tell us what sizes we should cut. So I think technology is an area, like there's always a lot of things I think we can do better. Just the idea of technology should be at the top of that list.
Look, there's so much to do. You have to identify where the pain spots are. It's about size forecasting. You start there because I don't know what's more important than having the right inventory levels to support not only your e-commerce business, but your partners, especially with as much in-season chasing as it sounds like they're doing, which is key to your business.
Exactly.
One thing I want to just touch on, because I think it's really allowed you, Amy, and Citizens to be who you are, was going through management buyout of Citizens. Share with us a little bit more about what happened and what that means for the company.
Yeah. So when I joined the company, Berkshire Partners out of Boston, sometimes people confuse them with the other Berkshire. they were the majority owners of the company, and they are, I would just say, like a top-notch group. Like, it was never about, here's what we need to do in terms of growth, and we're looking for an exit on this timeline. Like, they are very, very thoughtful individuals. And then later there was a change, and Jerome bought back some of their ownership. And so they were the minority partner when 7 years ago or 6 years ago, I think it was, we had discussion about like, okay, it's time. So frankly speaking, we were the last investment in a fund that they had held for 11 years. Aritzia was in that fund, and we all know how well that's done. And so they just said, like, it's time. Like, we need to close the fund. And for Jerome as well, it was time. He had been working part-time. He was married for the second time, and they had a baby or they were expecting one. And, I think the industry, it had changed a lot in all of the years that he was in it. And so we went through the typical process because that was the right thing to do. And there were a number of interested, like doing a book and talking to everyone and like looking to sell the company or, take on a different structure. And so, I went through the process and met with a lot of people, and it was the early days of AGOLDE. I think maybe AGOLDE was like 3 or 4 years old. And I was like, here's what this brand is going to be and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, there were 3 very interested parties, all that made, meaningful offers, but they weren't the right ones for us. Like, one was a typical private equity group that had another business that wasn't doing well. And their vision was like, oh, we could run the whole thing. And then one of the others was going to borrow a ton, as typical. They were going to borrow. And then there was debt on the business, and there were like these expectations. And Gary, again, who's super smart, was like, this just doesn't make any sense for us. Like, we know exactly what we need to do. And there's going to be different pressures or different headwinds if we go with what's on the table. And so a very generous, successful individual that Gary has known for a long time, and coincidentally I was introduced to when I was at the Gap, said, you know what, I know the way you guys run things, and like, I'll come in and I will be the investor. And so we were able, the rest of the management group and I were able to put that together. And frankly, I think wasn't the highest offer, right? And so both the Berkshire team and Jerome were thoughtful enough to say, this was good for us while we were all in it together, and why not make this great for everyone else who we're going to leave behind? And so there was an elegance and I think a grace to the transition of the relationship, that it wasn't money first. We're going to be really proud in the later years that we were associated with the chapter that we were all in together. And I think that's true now. I mean, Marnie and I talk every, couple of weeks or whatever. And I think they are collectively proud of what we've been able to accomplish. And it wouldn't have happened had this other individual not been the person that he is.
And I think coming back full circle to what you said earlier in terms of your growth strategy and this measured approach that's been extremely successful, not only in growing the profitability as many times as you have, but also the top line at the same time, was made possible by really controlling your own destiny and not being forced to do things by private equity that aren't necessarily right for the business, but maybe better for the private equity company, which ends up putting a company at risk. So clearly that worked out well for you. And I'm sure there's still thoughts of what an exit might look like at some point in time down the road. You don't have to touch on that right now.
No, I think we think about, like, we fantasize about, maybe fantasize is the wrong word. We think about and we respect strategic folks that are out there doing things well. And that is more interesting over time. I always think the collective of intelligence and competence, and other people are more competent at certain things. We are competent in a number of areas, but there's competencies out there that are attractive. And if it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And if not, we run a really great, and we have a good time doing it. That's the other thing. There's a lot of joy in the day.
Not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot. If your phone were to ring now and there was a buyer on the phone, who would you want that buyer to be? What's the perfect fit? Where would Citizens AGOLDE just be the perfect fit into a portfolio that you would feel like, wow, this is the right transition for us?
My guess is that the phone would be ringing from Europe, I think, because I think there's a discipline, as I mentioned earlier, that those groups have. And I also think there are a lot of synergies and similarities. Like we own our own factories. Many of them do. We are thoughtful about sourcing partnerships. I think it's really fascinating some of the collaborations that have come around sourcing of cashmere yarns and things like that over the last couple of years in Italy in particular. I think there's some really interesting individuals. One of the companies I like a lot is Varley. It's a small activewear company, and I think it's really well run by Ben, and his wife is the creative director. They have an investor from a very successful, very large scale, but like I know that he's a thoughtful individual, right? So it's like I think of the people as much as the brand more than anything. And it's not to say there isn't someone here. We work with Aritzia, so I think like Brian Hill is spectacular in terms of the way he thinks and the way he runs a business, even in his new role. But yeah, I always think about like who do we respect, and then what are the complementary? How do we like all complement each other?
Greatest challenge facing citizens today would be?
I think influencing wholesale partners to change, particularly the contemporary space. It's probably not the biggest challenge. I think the biggest challenge is the complexity between sourcing, producing quality products across categories. So that's probably the biggest one. I think the second one is probably macro environment issues, right, which affect employees, whether they're close to home or further away. But I think what's top of mind for me right now and a big project we're working on is the retailers are paying attention to us and they want us more and more and are doing right by us. But I think we have to do the work to say, okay, this is what it looks like. Like when we think about presenting our brands well, this is what we're asking you to do. So that's a smaller challenge. That's a very like near term, short term thing. But yeah, I would say continuing to be able to scale and grow while owning our own manufacturing base is probably the most challenging and complex.
Here's how old I am. 63, by the way, this year. So still kicking. But if you were to go back 30 years and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I think focus on bringing out the best in everyone else. Think of the early days of like a working career. You come out of school and it's like you're so used to like you're supposed to have the right answer and you're supposed to talk all the time and you're supposed to do all this stuff. I think sometimes you enter the working world and I mean, I never had a big ego, so I wasn't the first, as you well know, like to talk in every meeting, probably quite the opposite. But I think at times I was like told and pushed in that direction, like, oh, you need to speak up more and you need to do this. And I don't know that that's good advice for people because I think there are a lot of people who have great ideas and need a moment to think them through and they need a safe environment in which they feel like they can share them. And I have found in my years that those are often the people with the most interesting, innovative ideas. And if you give them the space and the grace to do it, you'll get a lot more out of them. So I think I wish I had had that self-confidence and awareness and wasn't worried about like what everyone else thought all the time.
I always admired the way you were able to lead from behind, from alongside, and out front, and never caught up with where you were, but were able to lead regardless. And I think that's
Thank you.
Truly a strong attribute,
Thank you.
which has obviously led to your success. Amy, we're going to pivot now to rapid fire. So
okay.
You ready?
Yes, I'm sitting up straight. Okay. Yep, ready to go.
Favorite fit jean now?
So I have to say two, and I can do that because I'm the mom of twins. So the Ayla from Citizens of Humanity and then the Ren from AGOLDE because they're nothing alike.
If you could live in any country outside of the U.S., where would you pick?
I'd have to say England because I found out about 15 years ago that my birth family is British and I love them. And there's something that's always drawn me to that country. And now I know why.
Favorite streamed show?
Well, Lessons in Chemistry, I thought was absolutely brilliant. Like heartbreaking, visually beautiful, empowering. Yeah, everything about that show I think was well done and everyone should watch it.
Who would you most like to meet?
I think Michelle Obama, actually. I was at a lunch or a breakfast yesterday morning and met a woman who was really amazing, whose husband happened to work as part of the administration after being part of Byron Trott's leadership group. And I thought, wow, like what an interesting 4 years you must have had, the conversations that you were a part of and you heard. And so I think someone like her, she's really honest and humble and Yeah, incredibly smart.
Last question. What hobby outside of work and family most consumes your time?
I would say volunteer work. Like, I really love helping other people. So, like, when I think about where I spend my time outside of like sporting events and, doing all of that kind of stuff with the family, I would say nonprofit work and being a part of groups of change that are supporting other people.
And with that, we will land this flight of the retail pilot. Amy Williams, thank you so much for
This was so
rejoining me.
fun. Yes, this was really fun.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's flight of the retail pilot. And please give us a review on your favorite podcast platform.